Welcome back, everyone. UristMcSparks with you again. And it is time to continue on with Roblox Racing. We're nearly there. It's got a couple more things I want to take care of. Now, firstly, we've got a nice little track here. Hopefully yours is more complicated than this, but again, for testing, a small track is fine. And we have checkpoints, and that way we can see if the game has been finished. If a player has won. We can even reset the cars if, we want to try racing it again. But what would be really nice is if we didn't have to have a player reset the cars. Well, buttons all well and good, but a game really should be able to take care of itself in terms of resetting everything. Don't need a button to do it. It'd be nice if the game would take care of it. So how should we go about doing that? Well, for starters, I'm going to get rid of this button. We don't need it anymore because my goal is to not need it. So, just getting rid of that. But let's leave everything else in place. All these other things have a really good purpose. I'm going to go into our script. And I'm even going to delete where we connect a function to respawn cars block. And even delete the variable for it too. I'm going to leave respawn cars though. I think that might be useful in the near future. So, how do we go about cycling through our game, making rounds? Well, the way we're going to do it is we're going to use a loop. We've already been using some loops. We've been using for loops, which are really good if you're going to go through a certain number of things. So in this case, we're going through all the things in the workspace. We can go through all the things in server storage, and there's going to be a certain number of things in there, and for loops are good for doing that when you've got a set of things to go over. But in this case, we want our game to go kind of forever. There's not a set number of times we want the game to loop. We want to just keep doing that until the game shuts down. Well, a loop that's much more appropriate to use in this case is something called a while loop. All we have to do is type while. I'm going to say while true, do, and we'll have our end. So kind of similar to a for loop. But it's also kind of similar to an if statement. So notice how in an if statement, let's look at a simple one, like say up here. If object name equals car, then do all this stuff in between the then and the end. Well, a while loop is kind of the same thing. While something, if something is true, do all the stuff between the do and the end. The difference between a do and an if statement is that the while loop will keep repeating itself. An if statement only checks once, and if it's true, it says, hey, do this thing, and then it's done. Now, a while loop says, well, is this thing true? Well, let's do that. And then after it's done, let's check it again. And that's what this loop will do. It's just going to keep cycling forever until the game shuts down. That's not something we have to worry about. For our purposes, we just want to loop forever. Now, one thing that's very important in while loops, particularly when you're looping potentially forever, you want to make sure there's some kind of pause in it. And to add a pause, we just add a wait. In this case, I'm going to wait, say 10 seconds. In this case, that's representing how much time there is between each loop. It's going to start the loop, do all the stuff in it, and it's going to wait 10 seconds before starting the loop again. If you do have a while loop without a wait, and especially a while loop that can go on forever, that has a very, very likely chance of breaking your game. You'll hit play solo, and it'll crash. So, a good thing to know is if you're going to be looping, especially pretty much forever, you want to make sure that you're putting in some kind of pause. Otherwise, the computer is just going to freak out on you. So what do we want to do in this loop? Well, to help myself get organized, I'm going to add some things called comments. Now, comments are a really nice way of just putting notes in your code. Things that aren't going to get run, but are nice to have. It helps you get organized. Now, to add a comment, I just have to add these double dash lines, the hyphen key, and then I'm just going to type some stuff. Well, let's see. The first thing I want to do is I want to set up the racetrack. Again, these are just notes. When the computer gets to this line, it's going to notice these two dashes and say, oh, things that are after that don't matter. And you'll notice that this is in green now. That just means the computer is going to ignore it. But it's nice for us so we can keep things organized. So what does that entail? Well, first we want to make sure all the lights have been turned off. Let's just make that a little bit more explicit. Turn off all lights. And those are just our start lights, the red, yellow, and green. Want to make sure that that barrier is reset. Reset barrier. So we want to make sure that the barrier is solid. This guy. I'm gonna add some space here too, just give myself some room. Then we want to make sure that we delete all the cars. Then we want to make sure we create all of them. And that's when we want to start the race. And that involves doing the light cycle. So we'll say start the light cycle. And we'll remove the barrier. And then at the very end, we just want to wait for race to finish. So let's tackle each of these one at a time. This seems like a kind of natural order for the game to go through. But these are just comments. They're not actually doing anything. This is for us to help us organize our code. Well, first we're going to set up the racetrack. We're going to turn off all the lights. Well, that's pretty easy. We know how to turn on and off lights. So let's actually make a function for that. We could very easily just say red light. We could easily just put these lines in here and disable all the lights, but I want to do this in a function to keep our code clean. I'm going to add function reset lights. And just like any other function we've done, I'm just going to make sure the red light is disabled. I'm going to make sure that the yellow light is also disabled, and I'm going to make sure the green light's disabled. Just so that all the lights are off at the end, at the beginning of the game. They may already be off, I just want to double check. And after our comment, I'm just going to say reset lights. Just call that function. Nice and easy to read. Cool, what's next on the list? Reset the barrier. Well, let's add a function for that. Function reset barrier. And that one, we just need to make sure that the barrier is somewhat see-through. So we're going to set the transparency. And we're going to make sure that it's solid. Can collide is true. So people can see through it, they know there's something there, but they know they can't drive through it. And we'll just reset the barrier. That looks nice. So what's next on the list? Well, delete all cars and create all cars. Well, we've got our function up top called respawn cars, which kind of does both. I'm going to split these into two, because a good rule of thumb to do when using functions is you want to make sure the function does something kind of specific. It only has one real task to it. If it's doing lots of things, it can get a little bit confusing. It makes it harder if you want to do those things at different times. So I'm just going to make this into two functions. I'm going to make a function destroy cars. And I'm going to make a function create cars. And I'm not writing any new code for it, of course. I'm just going to cut the code that we used before to destroy the cars. I'm just going to cut this code to create cars. And just delete this respawn cars function altogether. And that way, if we need to destroy cars at some point, but we don't want to create them, we just call destroy cars. Likewise, if we want to create cars, but we don't want to destroy the old ones, we just call create cars. If we want to do them both, we just say one after the other. It's no big deal. This way it keeps our code nice and organized. So down here, I'm just going to destroy cars. And then create cars. Lovely. Now then, let's start. Now we've got all of the race set up. Now let's go ahead and start it. So we'll start with the light cycle. Well, before we had just called this code, it wasn't in a function, it was just run when the game got to it. Let's move this all into a function. So I'm going to say function start light cycle. And in the interest of keeping everything organized and separate, I'm going to say function remove barrier. And that's where we'll do that extra code. So I'm just going to cut all this out, put it into start light cycle, highlighting it all using tab to scooch it over. That way it does the red light, yellow light, green light, just like before. And the barrier stuff, just remove that, putting into remove barrier. And this extra weight we can just delete. I don't think we need it there anymore. There we go. We have our function start light cycle, which we just made. And we have our remove barrier function that we just made. Neat. And so we pretty much just reused all the code that we had before, added a little bit of extra, but now it's in a nice, easy to read format. These comments, it makes it so that anyone who's looking at our game, if they're looking at our code, or let's say we come back here in like 3 or 4 months, want to remember what we did, we're just looking at this loop and we can see, well, we've got all these functions, and these comments which tells us what's going on. It's easy to figure out what's happening. Now then, this last part, wait for the race to finish. We haven't done anything quite like that yet, so how should we go about doing this? Well, before we've been using waits, like we've been using like this wait 10, or we've been waiting like 1 second between the lights. We've been waiting for a specific number of seconds. But I don't think that's going to work in this case, because we don't really know how long a race is going to take. You know, a short track may take 30 seconds for a good driver, but, you know, another type of track could take 2 minutes or 5 minutes. And it really depends on how fast the players do it. So we can't say in this case, wait a certain number of seconds before resetting everything. We have to wait until the race is done. And what better way to know when the race is done until someone's won the race? So let's add a new variable to help us out here, because I want to have a variable that's going to keep track of whether the race is finished or not. I'm going to make a variable called race in progress. I'm going to say that it's false for now. And basically, all this variable is doing is we're going to use it to keep track of whether the race is still going or not. So when we start up the game, it's going to start as false. The race is not in progress because the race hasn't started yet. Well, I'm going to copy that variable name. And down here, right when we start the race, I'm just going to say that the race is true. Or actually, the race really officially starts after we remove the barrier. So let's actually set it down there. And this basically says, okay, we're saying the race is going now, and we're keeping track of that in this variable. So anytime we want to check to see whether the race is still going, we can just look at this. So how can we use that here? Well, let's use another while loop. We're going to say while the race in progress do, I'm just going to say wait. And maybe I'll just say wait 1 second. Or no, let's just wait. Remember what I was saying earlier when we were setting up this while loop? We want to have some kind of wait inside of it because we don't know how many times it's going to loop. Could loop for a really long time. Could crash our game if we don't have a wait. I'm just putting a wait in here. And if you have a wait without any number inside the parentheses, you just say wait, open parentheses, close parentheses. It just waits for a fraction of a second. Just that gives the computer a chance to catch its breath, just, and then start the race again. So what's this while loop going to achieve for us? Well, while the race is in progress, remember we're setting race in progress is true here. So while race in progress, I'm going to say for a little bit more explicitness. So while the race in progress is true, just wait. And when it gets to the end, it's going to Again, check it again. Is the race still in progress? Well, if it is, then we're going to wait and go back again. Check it again. If the race is ever not in progress, if we somehow say that race in progress is false, it won't wait. It's going to say, oh, this isn't true. Race in progress doesn't equal true equals false. It won't go into this to the code in between the do and end. It'll just progress to the next line. And at which point it'll wait for 10 seconds and then start everything up again. Cool. But where do we say race in progress equals false to interrupt this loop, to stop it from cycling forever? Well, I'm just going to copy my variable name. Up here, when we said a player wins, that's a pretty appropriate time for a race to end. So I'm just going to add race in progress equals false, because race is no longer going on. At this point, we know that someone's finished the race, no longer need to keep saying, keep the race going. The race is finished. One other thing I'm going to add here to this condition, so I'm going to add and race in progress. The reason I'm adding this is because I only want one player to win the game. So what'll happen in this code, and just as a refresher what's happening here, this is if a player hits the first checkpoint, it's going to check the third checkpoint and say, hey, do we add a tag to that guy? Well, if so, then we know that that player won because they went through all 3 checkpoints and they've gotten back to the beginning. We're adding one more condition here. We want to know that the race is still going on. Because what could happen is that one player, pretend my mouse is a car, one player starts the race, goes through all of them, and finishes. Well, if someone is right behind him, or her, they finish the race, they finish right after them, and we didn't have race in progress, then that player would also win. Because there's nothing checking to see if it was the first player or to see if the race had finished. So we're just going to say if race in progress, because what will happen is the first person who crosses the finish line, the code will get to this point, and it'll say, hey, did that person cross the third checkpoint? Okay, they did. And is the race still going on? Hey, well, if both of those are happening, that means you're the first person to get to this checkpoint, therefore you win. And it goes on, prints out winner, says the race, and it says, okay, race, you're no longer in progress, you're done. And then it'll show the victory message, everyone will know who won. If another player finished, say 1 second after them, it would check the third checkpoint and say, hey, did you cross the third checkpoint? Okay, they did. But is the race still going on? Well, when the first player crossed the finish line, we said, no, the race is no longer going on. Race in progress is false. Therefore, if the second person gets to this, the race is done. And so this won't be true. And that player won't win. So that's why we're adding that little extra bit of code. So this actually looks kind of done. I want to make sure that this works though. Remember, testing, testing, testing. So we jumped into our game. Oh, it looks like everything already started without us. Oh my gosh. I kind of wanted to see the lights go. Well, let me reset a second. Go back to the script. Remember, when the computer does this, it goes through all this super, super, super fast. And before we start this while loop, there is no waits. You see, everything's just a function or a variable. There's nothing telling it to wait. It's just going to start right away. I'm going to add one wait here, just a wait 5, just so that I have a chance to see the very first race start. Actually, I may even wait a little bit longer. Let's wait, say, 10 seconds. Why not? I'm going to hit play solo. There we go. No cars yet in the world. The lights haven't switched. The barrier is still up. And then, after about 10 seconds... Oh, there are the cars. Oh, it goes red, yellow, green. Oh my gosh, that was fast. Didn't give me much time to get into a car before the race started. I might have to change that later. In the meantime, I'm going to drive really poorly. Ooh, oh my gosh. You didn't see that? No one saw that. Don't tell your friends that I am horrible at my own game. I'm just going to cross the finish line on foot. Who needs cars? Player 1 has won. Cool. Now we're going to wait 10 seconds, because remember our script said to wait 10 seconds after the race was done. Oh, and there it goes. All the cars were reset. Light sequence started again. And the game is ready to go again. We can hop into our car again. Oh, player 1 has won. Oh, interesting. Well, that's no good. What did we forget to do? Well, remember, when we've been going through these checkpoints, we've been adding a little tag that says the player crossed them. Well, when we reset the game, we never cleared out those tags. So as far as the checkpoints are concerned, the player still has crossed them. So as part of our reset step in our game loop, we need to make sure that all of the checkpoints have been cleared. So it's got a comment called clear all checkpoints. Also, as a very side note, I noticed that after the cars were created, we started the race really quickly. I'm just going to add a short wait here, just so you have a second to hop into your car before the race starts. My gosh. But in any case, back to business. Clear all checkpoints. Well, we need to make sure that all the checkpoints are empty. So we play solo, and let's say we cheat a little bit and we don't wait for the race to start, and we just hop into a checkpoint. We can look in the workspace in the checkpoint. We can see that we get that player 1 tag. And we want to clear that out at the beginning of every race, just to make sure everything's fresh, the checkpoints are empty. One thing though we don't want to do is we don't want to get rid of that touch interest. That's important. That's something that tells the game that it has a touch event tied to it and that a function is going to happen. So in the reset stage of our game loop, we're just going to want to clear out all the checkpoints. And I'm going to do that. Let's go ahead and just add that to the end of it right after we create all the cars. Let's clear all checkpoints. So how should we go about doing that? Let's start off with a function clear checkpoint 1. Let's just see where that takes us. Well, we've already know how to clear out something out of somewhere. We did that right here. We said if object name is car, then we want to destroy it. And we're going through all the children of workspace. Well, in this case, we're not going through all the children of workspace. We're going to use a for loop, but we're going to go through all of the children of checkpoint 1. Okay, children. And so what do we want to do here? Well, like before, we want to check the object name. And we want to see if it's equal to touch interest. Then we'll do object.destroy. However, we don't want to destroy it if its name is touch interest. That's kind of counterproductive. Remember, touch interest is the thing that we want to keep, because it's a special thing that the checkpoints need to work. We want to see if it's not equal to touch interest. Because if it's not equal to touch interest, then it's going to be one of our player tags. Well, a handy tool you can use to say if something's not equal to something else is instead of saying equals equals, you just say tilde equals. So all this if statement says now is it says if the object name is not equal to touch interest, then I want you to destroy it. Cool. And so what we need to do is just call that function where we need it to happen. Now then, we have to do it for checkpoints 2 and 3, but I've kind of realized something. If we did this, if we want to make a clear checkpoint 2 function, what would we really do different than what we did here in clear checkpoint 1? Well, instead of going through all the children of checkpoint 1, we'll go through all the children of checkpoint 2. But other than that, would we really do anything different? We'd still check to see if the object name's not touch interest. Still destroy the object. for loop would pretty much look the same except for this part. It actually really doesn't make too much sense to rewrite more or less the same exact function if we're only going to change one thing. What we can do in this case is we can actually use a function with a parameter. So to do that, I'm going to declare a new function called function clear checkpoint. And I'm going to make a new variable here just called checkpoint. And this is just a small variable that exists inside this function. And notice how it's between these two parentheses. If we ever want to say what this variable is equal to, well, all we have to do is define that when we call this function. So if instead of saying clear checkpoint 1, we just said clear checkpoint, which is the name of this new function, and in between the parentheses we said checkpoint 1, that would assign this variable here in this function to checkpoint 1. Notice we're doing the same exact thing when we're doing our waits. We're saying wait, which is the function name, and inside the parentheses, we're giving it that extra little bit of information saying, well, this is how long I want you to wait for. Well, in this case, we're saying clear checkpoint, and in the parameter, the thing between the parentheses, we're saying, this is the checkpoint I want you to clear. And what the inside of the function will look like, it's the exact same as what we had just written, but we're just using the variable name checkpoint, this thing right here. That way, whatever checkpoint we say needs to be cleared, it'll go through it. It'll just use this variable name. So if we said clear checkpoint 2, it would call this function. And this variable called checkpoint, well, that's going to be checkpoint 2 because we said that in the parameter. Again, just like how wait, we said 5, here we're saying clear checkpoint 2. And this variable is going to be checkpoint 2. And then when we go through all of the object in pairs checkpoint get children, well, remember checkpoint is really checkpoint 2. And then we can even say clear checkpoint 3. And that's all there is to it. And so again, that's a really handy rule of thumb. You could, if you wanted to, you could write a separate function, clear checkpoint 1, clear checkpoint 2, clear checkpoint 3. If you wanted to, the code would run just fine, no problems there. This is a little bit more readable. This just says any checkpoint that I give you, clear out all of its children. This function doesn't have to know a specific checkpoint to clear, it just says I'm expecting a checkpoint at some point. And when I'm given a checkpoint, I'm just going to make sure it doesn't have any children that aren't named touch interest. That's all I'm going to do. And then in the program, when we're calling the function, at that point we can say which checkpoint we want to clear. Neat. So let's test this out, make sure this is working correctly. Ooh, here we are in the game. Because remember how this all got started. We ran through the race, and we tried to start again, but it thought the race was over because the checkpoints hadn't been cleared. Let me in. Let me in. There we go. And we're off. And we're just going to try to get through to the end. Woohoo, I won. I'm a winner. Yeah. And let's just see everything get reset. Should take about 10 seconds. So there it goes. I'll hop back into our car. And this time, when we cross this start-finish line, we shouldn't win. Aha! And we can even look inside the checkpoints. We'd already crossed the start line, so we did get that tag player 1 here. But checkpoint 2 and checkpoint 3 are empty. We drive through them. It adds our name to it. Adds our name to checkpoint 3. And there we go. And then I won again. And we can even just watch it in action once it clears in a couple seconds. And boom, they're all empty. Perfect. And our game is looping. And it's starting up the light sequence again. And there we go. Looking terrific. Well, I think we've been going on long enough on this lesson. I think we have a nice little game loop going. But stick around, in just a moment we're going to finish off our game by adding a lobby. It's a very common feature to have in Roblox, and I think it'll work great in our game. But until then, this has been UristMcSparks with Roblox, and remember, you make the game.